Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Update, brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org, nonprofit journalism to root out corruption in Connecticut. We have three stories to talk about today, joined by the entirety of the CII team at full strength. I'll also mention that we are hiring as well. So if you are an investigative journalist looking to do this kind of work and work with this amazing team, please check out our website and apply. The three stories for today. First, we're going to talk about a hearing that happened yesterday, Wednesday. We're recording this on Thursday, October 12th, dealing with the DCF investigation that Mark had done several weeks ago. We're going to talk about the pension debt that is being paid down. And we're also going to talk about an odd story involving someone getting in trouble with law enforcement over the placement of a grill in East Haven. Mark, you were in the room at this DCF hearing. You said it was a busy place to be. How was that hearing? Fill us in.
Yeah, it was it was surprisingly full. And a lot of cameras there. I mean, pretty much, every major news source in Connecticut seemed to have a presence there. And for people who don't know, this is related to the short-term assessment and respite home located in Harwinton, Connecticut. Over the past 2 years, that home has seen deteriorating conditions as far as the staff's ability to maintain control. It's a shelter for adolescent girls who have been removed from horrendous family situations. But there were, numerous incidents of, not just incidents with the girls themselves, but staff incidents where, sexual abuse, physical abuse, a lot of arrests, and really pushing the boundaries as to what this particular town could do in terms of their emergency services. There's, they only have a resident state trooper, they only have 2 ambulances, and this was eating up a lot of their emergency resources trying to respond to all these incidents at this home. So we obviously did the story about it. We broke the story about it. And from there, it's, as these things kind of do, is taken up a life of its own. There's now a lawsuit against the contractor, which is Bridge Family Center. And for that reason, because of that lawsuit, the Bridge Family Center executive director, Margaret Han, was not able to be at the hearing to, answer questions before the Children's Committee of the General Assembly. They sent a statement that the clerk read out loud, and so that was that as far as Bridge Family Center was concerned. Then they went right into talking with Commissioner Vanessa Durantes of the Department of Children and Families, who, these teenage girls are in the care and custody of DCF. And their, Bridge Family Center is their contractor. So they were first up to speak. And, what was kind of frustrating with this hearing was it was limited to 2 hours hard stop. And by the time the lawmakers got through questioning DCF, there was maybe 10 minutes left before 3 o'clock came around. And so we were only able to get a very brief discussion with the Office of the Child Advocate. Sarah Egan was there. And, she had submitted a fairly voluminous report on the STAR home in Harwinton and just STAR homes in general, because there's, I think they said about 6 throughout Connecticut or 7. And so she was able to, she has this fantastic report that I want to dive a little deeper into. But she was only able to give a few minutes of testimony. And then I thought what was really troubling was the town officials from Harwinton who had come up there. The first selectman, Michael Chris, was there, as well as Kevin Ferrati, chief administrator for the emergency medical services in Harwinton. They were there, but they never got a chance to speak. And, it was certainly unfortunate being that, they're kind of on the ground there having to, deal with some of these issues. And the statement from Bridge Family Center kind of, lobbed a couple accusations at town administration and things that they were not able to respond to because it just ended. So, myself and, another reporter from Paul Hughes from the Republican American were able to get a couple quotes from, Michael Chris and Kevin Ferrati before everybody kind of went their separate ways. So yeah, in that way, it was a little disappointing. We got to hear pretty much exclusively from DCF and not really much of anybody else. And, obviously, DCF admits that there were some aspects to the Harwinton Star home that were outliers, particularly the abuse and neglect allegations. These kind of homes where they're housing these troubled teenagers, for people who don't know, they're not locked. The teenagers can essentially come and go as they please. They're not in jail. So those kind of incidents are fairly common across, Star homes in Connecticut. But when it came to the repeated abuse and sexual assaults and things like that, that's where, DCF said that the Star home in Harwinton was a bit of an outlier. The committee chairs said that this is the first step. It was just an informational hearing, not a public hearing. And so we'll see if it's the first step. Like I said, 2 hours was certainly not enough time for an informational hearing to get all the information because a lot of voices were left out.
It also seemed like they spent about 15 minutes at the time saying that they only had 2 hours. The number of times that came up, I was like, all right, let's move on. I really appreciated you staying later there too. And in the article that Catherine wrote, we actually included audio from First Selectman Chris there as well, just to try to flesh this out. And I think you're right. The 2 hours wasn't enough. Catherine, when you obviously were tasked with taking this and then writing it and reporting it out, does that challenge it for you? I mean, because you really only get part of the picture at the end of this hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when, they first announced during the hearing that it was going to be a hard 2 hour, I was kind of shocked, especially looking at the agenda where they had, 5 or 6 people lined up to speak. And we were, I think, over an hour into it at that point, and we were still hearing from DCF. Fortunately, Mark was in the room. I believe they handed out a packet of information that included testimony from some of the other people. And so Mark was able to transmit that information to us, and we were able to include it. But unfortunately, the broader public didn't get to hear that information. And, I think this hearing is obviously it's about lawmakers trying to deal with the situation, but it's, also because it's publicly broadcast, it's about the public hearing more about this, what's going on in this home too. And, I think it was a real missed opportunity to be able to flesh out more than just DCF's perspective on what was going on there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, hopefully there's more. I know there was certainly a lot of coverage about it. I haven't read everything yet, but I'm hoping that some of these other outlets also took some time and dug into some of these different angles and shared some of the stuff that needs to be heard.
There was a woman, and I believe her husband, at the hearing, whose foster daughter had been through that particular Star home. And they had wanted to testify, but because it was an informational hearing, lawmakers only invited stakeholders, essentially, people with knowledge of what was going on here. But they had a packet of what was essentially what would have been their testimony that they were handing out, and that's something I plan to come back to as well.
All right. Yeah, obviously, for anyone who's not already subscribed at insideinvestigator.org, definitely encourage you to give us your email. We send out 2 emails a week, Wednesday and Sunday mornings, that have our headlines and information. So that's the easiest way to make sure that Mark's follow-up coverage, Catherine's follow-up coverage on this topic specifically arrives seamlessly to your inbox. I hate to cut this off because I feel like we really could talk about this for probably more than 2 hours. But I do want to move on to pension debt being paid down. This is another huge thing across Connecticut. There's a lot of different factors here. Tricia, you dug into this. Give us a rundown if you could.
Sure. I dug into specifically a press conference that Comptroller Scanlon's office had, talking about the current budget, sort of where everything sits right now, and the numbers that they gave out were unofficial. They're going to be certified later, and then actually released as like solid numbers by the end of the year. Mark has also done a lot of coverage on paying down the pension debt, so he'll definitely be able to help me out with some of the specifics, because there's a lot of like specific things that go into the way that the state's paying down the pension debt. But essentially, the state has a lot of pension debt. There are two different areas where it exists. One with the state employees, which is like 20 something million, 25 million, 23 million, something like that.
Yeah, that's billion with a B, right?
Billion, sorry, billion.
No, I
Yes,
just want to
23
make sure. Yeah.
billion. It was back in the day, the governor at the time made a bad deal with the state employee bargaining, collective bargaining unit, that essentially put the state into pension debt, and then they just have been, according to Comptroller Scanlon, kicking the can down the road, and letting future administrations deal with it, to the point where the budget, not the budget, the debt ballooned to those billions of dollars. So in addition to the state employee pension debt, they also have teacher pension debt, which is at 19 billion, I believe. So I think it's like 21 billion, 19 billion. It's not quite $40 billion. It's like $39.1 billion, something like that, in total pension debt. So because the can just kept getting kicked down the road, eventually the state had to come up with some kind of rule for how they were going to pay it down, because without doing that, it's essentially like this giant credit card debt, and you have to make specific payments every year or else you're going to default. So in order to lower those yearly payments, they're trying to make balloon payments on the debt whenever there's a budget surplus. So the state's been in budget surpluses the last few years for various reasons. Because of inflation, sales tax went up, so they were able to, generate more income from sales tax, higher income or higher revenues for the state from income taxes, things like that. Have helped there to be this budget surplus for the past several years. And over the past 5 years, they've paid about $7 billion in this pension debt down, because of the rules that are in place. This is where I'm going to kick it over to Mark and put him on the spot to explain exactly how that happens, because I know that there's a cap on how much the state can invest in the rainy day fund, essentially, and then money has to go into other places. One of those is the what's it called?
Yeah, it's
volatility fund.
The volatility cap. Yeah. Basically what it does is, when it comes to income taxes on Wall Street earnings, what they call estimates and finals, that can be a make or break tax for Connecticut, because when it's up, it's great and we have lots of money. When it goes down, and this happened, I remember specifically back in like 2015, 2016, all of a sudden we're left with this massive budget deficit because we were counting on this money we don't have. So since it's so volatile, what the legislature in 2017 decided to do is say, when we have a surplus in income taxes from these Wall Street earnings, we take that surplus and first put it into the rainy day fund, so we don't get caught with our pants down again, like we did the last recession, where we don't have enough money to pay the bills. And once the rainy day fund is maxed out at 15% of the general fund, then the money goes into paying down the pension debt. And this has worked remarkably well the past few years, as the earnings have come in fairly high. Like Tricia said, we've been able to pay down $7 billion worth of debt. Not only does that pay down our debt, but it also lowers our yearly payments. I mean, just like your credit card, you pay down a good chunk, your required payment goes down, and that saves us money in the budget just year to year. So far it's been a successful program. It's considered one of the fiscal guardrails that the legislature just re-upped this past session. I think it came out of 2017 with the Republicans and Democrats working well together, actually in opposition to Governor Malloy at the time. So this has all been good news for Connecticut. And, I think Lamont has done, especially with the teacher pension debt, there was some issues around there. They had taken out a pension bond in 2008 of all times, $2 billion they borrowed to put toward the teacher pension debt right before the market crashed. and that did not work out so well. So he was able to find a way to refinance all of that, get the teacher pension payments into a more stable position, and now we've been paying it down by the billions. I did an article this week just about Connecticut's total debt. And over the past 2 years, our total debt, including like we put a bond cap in 2017 as well, it's come down like $10 billion. It's not bad.
I was gonna.
Yeah, so that's
sorry.
sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Trisha. No,
So that was the gist of essentially that section of the conversation that Scanlon's office was having with the press about, the state's doing a pretty good job in paying that debt, but also the debt is still very large, and they will never know, like, if next year we're going to have the same budget surplus, if next year we're going to have the money to continue paying it down. Like, we could end up going into a deficit in a few years, so there's always that chance that the money isn't going to be there. I know this year they paid $1.3 billion into the two different pension funds, and we're able to pay it down that much, which lowers the annual rate. I think it was a couple $100 million in total payments that they have to make every year. So that was definitely good. So that was sort of like that big chunk. The pension debt stuff was about half of that presentation.
And just to put it in perspective, the by Governor Malloy's own admission, the two tax increases in 2011 and 2015, every dime of that went to pay for the pension debt.
Yeah.
Like that's how big it was getting and what a problem it was becoming. So it seems like we have things under a much better, sense of control now.
It's exciting. Headed in the right direction. I mean, obviously, what the article that Mark was alluding to that he wrote yesterday, again, that's Wednesday, October 11th, was that Connecticut ranked 49th for taxpayer debt despite improvements, is the headline, and beat out New Jersey. So there you go, 49 out of 50. I'll also point out, Wallet Hub does their 2023 best and worst state economies, and Connecticut is in the middle. It's 24th. So I think that there are some positives there across the board. Catherine, I know you've written on stuff on this topic previously. I not to turn it into a debate style anything, but I want to at least give you the opportunity to either comment anything related to that, or if you want to tell us about this grill situation in East Haven and jump right in there too. I wouldn't blame you one bit either.
Well, I'll say my grandmother does have a teacher pension in Connecticut, so I'm going to refrain from commenting on that subject. And let's just talk about people going to jails over placing their grills too close to their residences. So this is kind of a weird little case. And if you're, a law geek, it's a really interesting one. Basically it involves a gentleman who lives in East Haven who, after a bunch of back and forth with the town fire official, is facing criminal charges and potentially jail time over allegations that his grill was placed too close to a residential building. He lives in a condominium complex, and part of what's at issue here is his residence in the condo complex is single unit. So under, the way the fire code is written, there's specific language that's in contention, which says, quote, that all building structures and areas adjacent to such buildings and structures, except in private dwellings occupied by one or two families upon all premises. And it's that upon all premises phrase that's really the source of contention here. So basically, this gentleman and his lawyer are saying, hey, he lives in a single family unit. The fire code doesn't apply. You can't enforce this. You can't send him to jail over that. And the state is saying, well, no, upon all premises means you might live in a single family unit, but that single family unit is in a larger condo complex, which I believe has something like 75 different residences in it. So because it's part of that larger unit, we can regulate this. We can regulate or we can press charges against you for violating this code, and it does apply to you. And so that's really kind of the crux of what's going on here. There have been 2 motions to dismiss the case that have been unsuccessful, and there's a possibility that this may go to jury trial.
Are we talking about like a charcoal grill, a propane grill? I mean, is it just his Weber sitting on his back porch, or, what's the deal?
Yeah, I believe it's either a charcoal or a propane grill. It's not specified. I know at one point the East Haven Fire Department did ask for clarification from the state about their interpretation of the fire code. And they had said that you can have an electric grill closer to your premise. So it's not that type of grill. So I think that would have to mean it's probably either propane or charcoal.
So not
I
a
think
not a
from the
George Foreman
picture,
grill. Yeah.
No, I don't think it's a George Foreman grill.
there was a photocopied image in the documents too. It was pretty, photocopy. It's an old technology. It's not like they were doing digital uploads, but it did appear to be propane from the way that the hood was set up.
And it's just, I mean, how far away from his house does it have to be? I mean,
According to the fire code, it needs to be at least 10 feet.
10 feet.
Right. So basically, the grill was placed up against a set of stairs, allegedly, at least according to the affidavit that was part of the application for arrest for this gentleman. And so, they're claiming that his grill was too close, and basically he could go to jail over the fact that his grill was within 10 feet of a building, which, he and his lawyer are saying, and probably rightly, seems like kind of a ridiculous use of the judicial system, especially this is in East Haven. So we're talking about, an area that is not untroubled by other criminal activity.
Huh.
That's
I
fast.
mean, what, just out of curiosity, because this just seems like the most odd, why didn't he just move the grill?
Well, see, and this is part of, if you read the affidavit, there's kind of a long history. And initially, he did move the grill, but also, challenged the fact that because he's claiming that his unit is single residence, that the fire code shouldn't apply to him. And so then moved the grill back towards the building. And I think part of that history of this repeated, set of incidences that this gentleman has had with the fire department might play some role in the fact that they decided to arrest him over this.
Mhm.
It's a grilling protest, essentially. Yeah.
I'm looking around here. I think I have 2 copies of Thoreau's Civil Disobedience within arm's reach right now. Probably have relevant quotes to come out of there. Oh man. All right. So legal technicalities. We're going to see how this plays out. I don't know if, obviously it may or may not be worth a follow-up, but we're also trying to do more to update people on these kind of one-off things on our social media as well. Some folks in Connecticut that we would love to emulate are, tracking stories and informing people in real time. Trisha did a great job with this at a press conference she was at the other day for solar power and wind, and basically how that's going to work. You did 2 articles off of that. I don't know if that's a relevant tie-in you wanted to mention there, Trisha.
I mean, it's basically the future of offshore wind in Connecticut, which Governor Lamont's administration is really hoping to invest in, which is definitely going to have people either very happy if they're very into clean energy, or very upset if they're not really into helping other states with their clean energy goals, because the State Pier project, which has a lot of people, up in arms and concerned, is the first place that it's supplying turbines to will not power Connecticut. It's going to power New York. But the state, I believe, is hoping that investment in clean energy is going to allow Connecticut to have some kind of energy position in the country. You have like West Virginia or Texas with oil and coal, and as fossil fuels become less popular or possibly less available, I think the governor is hoping that Connecticut's access to offshore wind, and the ability to invest in offshore wind and create jobs to create turbines or build turbines or possibly run certain companies will make the state more possibly it's basically early investing in something he's hoping will become much more popular and much more useful later. So that's one of those things that remains to be seen. There wasn't a ton of information about exactly the plan to go, use those things, but it was definitely, we're excited about this industry and we hope that it will be beneficial to the state. But yes, there are 2 stories, one about the actual press conference and what they announced, and then one about just how the heck offshore wind farms work, in case people are curious.
Absolutely. And you did live tweet the press conference. You got great
Did,
photos.
yes.
The scale of the operations kind of blew my mind. I didn't quite understand that without the work that you were doing visually.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people have seen a wind turbine in some kind of setting, right? Like probably on land. Like landed turbines, I feel like people see all the time. I drove through like a terrifying field of them in Iowa in the middle of the night because they've got these blinking red lights, and I was like, "Are we about to be abducted by aliens?" Because it's just like this huge number, vast number of them, and these like looming shadows in the dark. But you don't really understand how big they are until you're standing next to like just one blade from the turbine, and it's like at least a football field long.
I find them so hypnotic.
They are, yeah, they are. Except when they're staring at you looming in the darkness of an Iowa prairie. So,
All right. Well, cool. I know Joe is probably giving us the hand signal here that we've gone over time. I really appreciate each of you making time in your morning to talk about this. As always, what we talked about today is just a sliver of what we publish on InsideInvestigator.org. A huge thank you to our donors and each of our subscribers whose support allows us to do this work. Thank you for watching Inside Update to all of you here. We'll be back in 2 weeks. And until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.